This is the finished Accu-Vision project, which is described in this two-part video series. This video is part 2 of the video series on the production of this Accu-Vision project. In part 1 of this video series, I described the production of this vortex or dizzy pattern sphere, which will be used for the ball of the eye. In this video, we'll be describing the production of this segmented disc for the iris of the eye. Normally when I'm producing a segmented disc from a laminated board such as this with many multiple layers of contrasting woods, I glue up this board such as this, and then I cut my wedges from this laminated board and end up with segments with the pattern going around in a circular pattern, and end up with a project such as this with a circular pattern of disc. But for this iris, I wanted my pattern of the pieces of wood going in this direction towards the center to create a radial pattern. So quite different technique. So it involved quite a bit more work, creating a laminated board, cutting it up into sections, re-gluing it to make another longer board with the lines going in the opposite direction, and then using that to make my radial patterned segmented disc. And this consists of a bunch of thin segmented wedges going in a radial pattern to the center of the iris of the eye to produce this unique pattern. So this video describes in some detail how I created the segmented disc to produce this iris. And then we'll conclude that by taking this iris, drilling a hole into the sphere, and then finishing the project. I'm using the automated Accu-Slice system for cutting these boards to make the iris for this project, but I could just as easily have used the standard Accu-Slice system. So on the automated Accu-Slice system, I'm going to be cutting this piece of poplar. Poplar is about 24 inches long, about 1 3/4 inches tall, and I'm using my flat plate clamps. So I have everything down real low so you can see things pretty easily. So I'm going to be cutting a piece of slivers off, probably 1/15,000 of an inch thick. So I have a system set up to cut boards 1/15,000 of an inch thick. My blade curve is set to 45 thousandths. My forward speed is 10 inches a minute, and my reverse speed is 40 inches a minute. This section of the video is actually sped up 10 times the actual cutting speed for viewing purposes. With the automated Accu-Slice system, the indexing system advances the board 50 thousandths of an inch for the curve of the blade, plus another 15 thousandths for the board thickness I want, and then slices the board through the bandsaw blade automatically. The advantage of using the automated Accu-Slice system is that I cut my boards very slowly at a constant even speed. As a result, the boards that come off the system are very smooth, with no saw marks, no bandsaw blade marks. They're just perfectly smooth, require no sanding whatsoever. This can be done manually on our standard Accu-Slice system. It would just take longer, and it's just hard to saw that slowly for that length of time. Well, I cut a total of 10 boards off of that piece of poplar. Each of these around 15,000 inch thick, actually between 13 and 16,000 inch thick. And the surface is amazingly smooth. This was cut with an 8-teeth per inch blade, but cutting it at 10 inches a minute gives me a very, very smooth cut. This next board is a piece of catalox, and again it's about 24 inches long, about 2 inches tall, and I'm using the flat plate clamps to hold it on to the Accu-Slide 2 carriage. And I need some very thin slices of this catalox. I needed some accent rings for projects I'm working on. I'd like to get some pieces maybe 10 thousandths and maybe even thinner. So let me try cutting a piece 10,000 inch thick first, and we'll see how it works. To make the iris of the eye, I cut about 6 boards between 8 and 10,000 inch thick, and then I cut 2 boards about 1/4 of an inch thick for the pupil of the eye. So this next board is a piece of yellow heart, again 24 inches long, 2 inches high, and I want to cut some more thin boards between 8 and 10,000 inch thick, again for this project I'm working on. From this piece of yellow heart, I cut about 6 pieces of wood about 8,000 inch thick, and then I cut about 3 pieces that were about 15,000 inch thick from this yellow heart board. Okay, I'm ready to glue up these thin boards, and there's 35 boards here. and vary in thickness from as thin as 7/1000 of an inch, and the thickest piece is 20/1000 of an inch thick. And they're different contrasting woods. I have catalox and oak and poplar and yellow heart and red heart, maple, just a variety of different woods, all different contrasting colors, with very, very thin layers. I got 35 layers. I'll see if I can get glued up. I am using epoxy. I'm using the West epoxy system once again. I apply the epoxy glue to both sides of the board to make sure you get good coverage, and then stack the pieces of wood one on top of another. This process is shown in detail in some of my other videos on making some of my dizzy pattern bowls. And then after they're all glued up and stacked up, I'll put them in my glue jig press, clamp them together to squeeze out the excess glue to produce my laminated board. I'm using a series of spring clamps and C-clamps to squeeze the board together to squeeze out the excess glue. So after the gluing and clamping is complete, I allow this to dry overnight. Well, it's the next day, so let me take the clamps off of this and we'll clean it up. Well, let me take this to my saw and cut off the ends and run it through my planer to clean off the excess epoxy. Okay, there's the cleaned up piece, and you kind of see what it looks like. 35 layers and about 1/2 inch of thickness. So I have my dizzy pattern for my eyeball, and I want to put an iris on here. Iris looks something like this. This is a pattern. And normally when I make a segmented disc, you know, my discs are made from a board like this, and I make segments that run this way. But for this iris, I want lateral segments. So I'm going to make a board with the layers going in the opposite direction. So I'll be taking my board I just put together, I'll be cutting off probably about 1-inch pieces of this, stacking them up, gluing them up together to make a taller board with the layers all going in the opposite direction. And then from that board I'll make my segmented disc to make the iris for this project. So that's the next step. Let me take this to my saw, and we'll cut off some short pieces and then glue them back together. So I'm ready to cut my laminated board now into about 1-inch long pieces. And so I'm using my modeling saw, and I'm using this saw because the kerf of the blade is much smaller than a regular table saw, so I waste less wood. So I like to get like 24 pieces out of this. And these are a little over 1/2 inch thick, so I should get a board that's at least 12 inches long when I'm done. So again, I have my stop here using a square fence, and just be running the boards through the blade one at a time. So let me go glue these up next. Okay, I'm all set to glue up my laminated thin boards to make a long board. And each of these pieces has 35 layers. It's a little over 1/2 inch thick, and I have 24 of these segments. My total length here is around 24 inches. So I'm using my glue up jig that I used for some of the laminate boards I made in the past. This is nothing more than a board with a bunch of these offset cam clamps, a cleat here that I can trap these pieces and keep them kind of in a straight line so they don't wander too much, keep them kind of organized. And then I'll put a clamp on the edge to clamp them tight as I glue them up. And I will be adding a board on the end. This is just like a handle. So when I'm doing the segmenting, I can cut the whole way down to the end and not have anything where I have to waste wood because it doesn't, have to sit in the jig. So this just gives me a handle to get more length out of my board, which I'll show later when I do the actual segments. So now we're ready to start gluing up. And I do want to put a cradle wax paper in here first, just to keep the glue from sticking to everything. So let's put this cradle wax paper, put another cleat here, and this should work hopefully like this, and then just kind of keep the pieces in a line as I'm gluing them up. So let me start gluing these up. And I will be using the Type-On 3 glue once again. Even though these pieces were glued with epoxy, I need a faster setup time, so I'll be using the Type-On 3 glue. I am coating both sides of the pieces with the Type-On 3 glue, just to make sure I get good coverage. And then stacking up one against another in the jig. And the last piece is the, I'm just calling a handle for lack of a better term. It's not going to be part of the operation, just a handle to use during the segmenting process. So these pieces, just keep them in a straight line now so they don't wander too much this way. And then I'll clamp them with my bar clamp here. I decided to add a second clamp to give me more even clamping of the entire width of the pieces. I'll let that dry for at least an hour. Okay, after that was dry, I took it out of the jig and I ran it through my belt sander to clean up all the edges. So next I have to add these 2 layers of catalogs on the outside. These will become the pupil of the eye, much like this. So I have my pieces here, which will be the radials coming out, and then this black piece will be the iris, and there'll be a black rim on the outside also. So the next thing is to glue these on. I need 2 additional pieces for down here. So now we're ready to start gluing these on. Again, I apply glue to the laminate board and also to the catalogs pieces. Again, using Type-On 3 glue. And then after they're glued up, I'll clamp them together with some clamps. I then allowed the glued up assembly to dry for about 3 hours, and then I ran it through my sander to clean up the edges. Now I'm ready to make my segmented disc to make this iris for this project. And I'm trying to make this that my wedges come to a perfect point. And that's the most difficult type of joint you can do on the Accu-Slice system. I just did a prototype just to test it out. And this came out pretty good. But it's really hard getting those to meet to a perfect point. And the secret is, as you get the joint, as you're adjusting this, to just be able to feel the edges of the teeth of the blade on the edge of your cut. I'll show that as I'm setting it up. But I'll be cutting 18 segments for this segmented disc. So it'll be 18 of these pieces to make this segmented ring. So let me go and cut the first piece. Give me my starting cut. I have my laser on here to give me my cut angle. It's the first time I've done a segmented disc with the pieces running this way. Usually they run, horizontally. So this is something totally new and different. So I'm going to cut my first angle, and then I'll put it on here to cut the second angle. System's all set up, and usually when I go from this fence to this fence, I just take the fuzzies off the edge here. And then I'm setting this up. I have it all set up already, so I have my stop here. Push my board against the stop, and I'm always trying to get exactly the same spot. So I'm doing right in the center of the Accu-stop. And I lock it in place, making sure it's tight against the fence, tight against the table, and tight against the Accu-stop. Now when I push it to the blade, and I use my fingers as a guide, and I should just be able to feel the edges of the side of the bandsaw blade on the edge of the cut. Because if you cut too far to this side, this face of this angle is going to cause the blade to curve and you get inaccurate cuts. If it's too far this direction, you're going to get a big gap in the middle of your piece. You get a big hole in the center. So it's really critical to get it right on. But I think I'm pretty close. So let me go ahead and cut 18 of these. going back and forth between the two fences. That got messed up already. I put a line on here. Again, this is my offset line that I use to alternate between pieces as I'm cutting them. So let me recut this piece and start over. So again, push my board flat against my stop, tight against the table, against the fence, and then clamp it in position. And you always have to clamp it because that board will move if you don't clamp it. Let me sand these off camera and then we'll assemble them and see what they look like. The other thing is this handle I added, you can see why I added that. I was able to cut the whole way down and cut all my segments so I didn't waste any of my pieces on that. Okay, I'm ready to start gluing this up now. Once again, I am using Type Bond 3 to glue up the segments together to produce the segmented ring. And I'm putting glue on both sides of the disc. And then I arrange them in a pattern, make sure I have alternating lines on the top so I get the correct orientation. And then I'll clamp these with some rubber bands. And that's what it looks like. The side with the markings on it, and there's a side without the markings. So let that dry for a couple hours. I didn't record this next section, but what I did is I took my segmented disc and I put it in my lathe, smoothed off the front surface, and then turned the OD down to exactly 2.125 inches to give me a thinner rim on the outside edge of my iris. Okay, I have my iris all ready to insert into my eyeball, and I've jury-rigged the system to hold it straight and level, so hopefully this works good. I have the one piece clamped in the vise here, and I have this just to keep it level, and I'm using a 2 1/8 inch diameter Forstner bit to drill a hole, and this is exactly 2 1/8 inch diameter. So let's see how this goes. I just used some double-sided tape to take my segmented disc to a sacrificial fence, and I want to cut it in half to make a smaller section that I'll use on the piece I'm putting together. Now there's the piece inserted in the eyeball. I then glued the iris into the ball using Type Bond 3 glue. Okay, let me turn this down and see what it looks like. I did sand off the corners of the protruding iris so it would be easier to cut on the lathe. I did cut this very slowly and carefully in the lathe to make sure I didn't cut too deep, and stop quite often to double check my work. And then after it was finished cutting, I sanded it with some fine sandpaper. This concludes this two-part video series on a production of this Disney Vision project. In part 1 of this video series, I described production of this vortex or Disney pattern round sphere used for the ball of the eye. And in this video, we described production of this iris consisting of laminated boards going to a radial pattern to the center of the eye. If you have any questions, concerns, or comments on this video, please give us a call or drop us an email. We'll be happy to hear from you. And once again, thank you for watching this video. I did make a second Dizzy Vision project from the second Dizzy ball. And then I gave both of these Dizzy Vision projects about 20 coats of wipe-on polyurethane to give it a high gloss finish, which was not completed at the time of this video. There will be a part 3 of this video series, but instead of using a Dizzy pattern for the ball, I'll be using some segmented disc to produce a ball. This part 3 video will be available in about 2 weeks.